Welcome to the second edition of our For All series. This will be a quarterly series where we have experts come in and discuss a topical issue. So as you may remember, if you were here last month, we covered voting rights, obviously a really important issue right now and something the league is particularly championing. And for the second edition, we're talking about redistricting, which is another major league position and very important work that's being done behind the scenes. And you'll hear from Ray and Stephanie in a little bit, who are some of the people putting in the work to ensure that we have fair maps. I want to encourage everyone who is on the call to share the knowledge that you are learning today. You are welcome to tag LWV-Houston on Twitter and Instagram. We're also on Facebook, and hashtag with redistricting for all. I also wanted to share a couple of upcoming events this week, and I'll try, once the panelists start, I'll try to drop in these links into the chat because I know it might be difficult to see. But the first one is that this week is the LWV's People-Powered Day of Action. And Stephanie, maybe at the end you can talk more about this, but if you go to this site all week long, you'll see events happening across the country for leagues that are really organizing around redistricting and other issues. Next Saturday, May 8th, we will also be hosting our first new member orientation. And I will say that it doesn't necessarily need to be for new members. If you've ever wondered about the league's history, how you can get involved, all the inner workings of the league, feel free to join us. And our Vice President of Membership is leading that effort, Mika Rao. And then you will also have our board member, Eliza Alonso, facilitating that. We think this is going to be a really interesting way for members to really get more engaged. We realized that was a gap that we hope this will fill, and these will be happening also quarterly. And then save the date for our annual meeting. That will be coming up May 27th, and stay tuned for more information on that. Also, we have a couple of volunteer opportunities. The marketing committee is on the lookout for volunteer graphic designers, writers, digital media experts, all to help us increase our reach and impact. So if you know someone or you are interested yourself, please email marketing@lwvhouston.org. And then if you go to our website, lwvhouston.org/volunteer, there are myriad of opportunities for you to get involved. There is a form, if you click the Volunteer with Us button on that page, where you can share your interest and your availability, and then our team will connect you with the right volunteer opportunity. And then finally, our voter services team flagged that they are gearing up for fall voter registration, and that they're specifically looking for any connections to people at major medical facilities, so in the TMC or outside of it, where they might be able to host large-scale registration drives. So if you are that person, or again, know of someone, feel free to email lwv@lwvhouston.org. And finally, I will turn this over in just a second, and I'm going to say that I am not going to talk about this slide. I am actually going to wait until the end, when I will turn over the reins to Stephanie Swanson, who we're lucky enough to have here. She's the issues chair for LWV-Texas on redistricting, and she will be able to tell us how we can leave this conversation and really take steps to make a difference in redistricting and some of the other issues the league is advocating for. So with that, I am going to let Zach Miller take over as moderator of the conversation tonight. Zach is a longtime board member. He's been on the board since 2015, has served in various roles, including treasurer and then current VP of study and advocacy. He's also been a member since, I think, 2012. Is that right?
Something like that.
Something like that, a long time. And he, in his day job, is also managing director of outreach strategies. Zach, take it away.
Thank you so much. Everybody, welcome to this edition of For All, which, as you know, is our quarterly curated conversation around topics and issues that are important to us as a league and to us as the greater Houston community. I'd like to welcome our panelists this evening. We have Ms. Debbie Chen, who is the Director of Civic Engagement Programming for the OCA of Greater Houston. Debbie? Oh, you're muted.
Thank you for helping. Thank you for having me here. I apologize, I had some internet issues.
Those happen to the best of us. You're very welcome. Thank you for joining us. We also have Ray Shackelford. Ray is with the Houston Area Urban League, where he serves as a consultant to the Center for Social Justice. Ray is also a Morehouse man, graduate of Morehouse College and the C.T. Bauer College of Business. He is a longtime member of the Urban League's National Young Professionals Association, and I believe you are now its 10th president of the National Young Professionals Association. Ray, thank you so much for being here, sir.
Yes, Zach, that's correct. Good evening. Happy to be a part of the conversation.
Glad to have you. I'd also like to welcome my counterpart at the state level, the state chair for study and advocacy, Ms. Stephanie Swanson. Stephanie, I believe that the league has taken a very deep dive into the issue of redistricting and the census for this year. Thank you so much for making time to join us. Are you live from Austin?
I am. I just wanted to make a quick correction that I'm not in charge of advocacy. That would be Janet Imhoff, but I am in charge. We have different positions that we take. We have 30 some odd positions. So I'm in charge of redistricting, and it is a priority issue for both the National League and the State League this year. So happy to be here, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here, and forgive my oversight. Should have known better. All right, well then I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So to open things up, I'm going to ask a fairly broad question and let you all kind of chime in. So this question is courtesy of Courtney Siegfried, who was trying to help me think of a way to get everyone to sort of make their opening statement and remarks. And so here it is. If you were to have to compose sort of a flash brief on the issue of redistricting, what is it that you think the communities in Houston and the surrounding areas need to know about the state of redistricting currently? So what is the current state of redistricting in Texas? And what do you think is most important for people to know about it, understand about it, or realize about it? And I will also go ahead and buy you guys a few moments to think that one through and just sort of reiterate some top line points about redistricting. I'm sure that most of our members understand and realize that redistricting is the process for carving up the electoral map so that different federal jurisdictions have the correct number of residents living within them. It is based off of the census, and as you know, the Constitution mandates the census occur every 10 years. Since we have just concluded the census for 2020, the results of that are a few months late being released, but they have just been released. And it appears that there's going to be some interesting news for Texas. We are set to gain 2 additional congressional seats. But beyond the federal representation, it also determines a lot of local representation. So the number of state house districts, the number of city council districts, so on and so forth. And because it is such an important method for determining representation in the state, it's often politically fraught, and there are lots of different, sometimes overlapping, sometimes what's the word I'm looking for? Conflicting, conflicting agendas and ideologies. So that having been said, to return to the question, what do you think is most important for people to know about the state of redistricting right now as it stands today?
Look, can I just,
Oh, no, go ahead.
I want to clarify just a few things that you said really quick. So the number of districts that we have in the state are going to be pretty solid. The only ones that will change as far as number goes is our congressional districts, and that's based on apportionment. And those numbers were just released yesterday. And so while Texas did gain 2 congressional seats, which was great, we were the biggest gain of all the states in the nation, that number should have been 3. And that number was only 2 because the state did not put any funds into census outreach. Not only that, but because of the past presidential administration's poor decisions on excluding a whole myriad of different communities from the process, we are now left with a large undercount, and that did cost us a congressional seat. So I just wanted to point that out. And so I did want to clarify, though, that the number of state house seats, the number of city council seats, so on and so forth, they're all going to stay the same. What has to change, though, is the district boundaries, because people have moved across the state over the past 10 years. People even moved from different states. That's why we got more seats this past round, this past apportionment. So in order to rebalance our election district sizes to be equal in population, we have to redraw the districts, and that's what we refer to as redistricting. And so I'll let Ray answer from here. Go ahead, Ray.
Well, no, and basically what I was going to say, I think the most important thing for people to know is that it has a lot to do with power in terms of how decisions are made from a governing standpoint. When it comes to those House of Rep seats, I think presently, and Stephanie, you said it, we have, what is it, 36, excuse me.
Congressional seats, yeah.
Right. And so it'll go up to 38.
Yep.
Right now, the majority of those seats are Republican seats. I think 22, if I'm not mistaken. One is vacant, and then the rest of those are Democratic seats. And I think, just as a disclaimer, we are all nonpartisan organizations. We do not support any political parties or candidates. But it's very much dependent upon, how those different decisions, whether it's healthcare at the federal level, we're looking at, a lot of things concerning police reform, all these important issues, those seats, and ultimately how those lines are drawn from a power standpoint is going to impact us significantly. And because of the history of our state, when I was kind of reading up on it, because the last time we did the census, I had just come home from Morehouse, so I didn't really pay too much about it, as most 20-year-olds. But at this stage, I was much more engaged working with Stephanie, Debbie, and many other people. And so because of that, I think that they just need to understand that if we don't watch this process, because of the history of gerrymandering, and lawsuits will be coming or have already started to be formed, we have to make sure we protect our rights. Typically, that process takes anywhere from 8 months to a year, but because of the shortened window, we're only going to have 5 to 6 months to get those things done. And if we don't get them done, it's going to continue to push back potentially those deadlines or filing deadlines for the primaries. We're talking about 2022 election cycle. So the impact is significant, but I guess to just, encapsulate it, it's about power in our communities.
I would just say, I'm sorry.
No, I was just about to say, Debbie, please weigh in.
The first thing that comes to my mind of what I think the general public needs to know and really understand about this process is that it has historically not been fair, not been transparent, and really not, had public input. Frankly, this is the third redistricting, third census that I've volunteered and worked on. And each time, because it's not transparent, because there's no real public input, right? It's you kind of have this like go through the motions, you'll have a sudden, pop-up town hall opportunity to speak to the committee, but not actually real time of giving notice to the general public to actually meaningfully be able to participate, right? It's just this kind of like, well, we'll just go through the motions. And the result is the fact that power is not distributed in a way that reflects the will of the people, right? I think that the majority of people in Texas would actually want to have, good schools, good roads, good healthcare, access to healthcare, access to, food. And these are all government programs that not necessarily the people in leadership have cared about for a long time. And so what Ray was saying about power, how does that directly translate to people? That's what I would tell people, is that because it hasn't been transparent and people haven't, the average person has not been able to actually meaningfully contribute and have their voice heard of the issues that really impact them and the people that they work with, that we have the policies we have, and we're seeing the results of that.
That's an excellent point. I'd like to continue on this idea of the power that is at stake here. So when we talk about the power, when you use that phrase, I am thinking specifically that translates directly into the number of seats that are accorded to a community, to its voting power, so that when they elect a representative, or plural representatives, it sort of increases it amplifies the voice of that community. So please correct me if I'm wrong, but is that really what is at stake here when we talk about the power that's at stake? Is it the representation and the funding that comes with the head count? Or do you think that it's more subtle, more nuanced than that? And let me ask Stephanie to start us off with that.
So first of all, this whole idea of power, you have to look at voting rights since actually the time of Reconstruction, because it is still people of color and voters of color that are excluded from representation. And it is a found belief of the League and of many other organizations that everyone should have the ability to represent themselves and to have the ability to make decisions that are important in government and be able to influence the government as well. And that's not happening right now. And so what's happening is the legislator, who is currently all conservative members, they control House, Senate, state level, so the governorship. They're going to be in charge of drawing the district maps again in 2021. They were in charge in 2010. They were also in charge in 2003. And they drew maps that were heavily skewed towards Republicans. So everyone has equal representation. However, what they do is it's called packing and cracking. So they pack voters into as few districts as possible. And then they also crack them into multiple districts. And this is all to dilute the power of their vote. So people can't elect representatives that reflect their communities, that understand their communities. What they've done is currently they have drawn maps that really heavily favor the Republican Party. So in 2011, after the 2011 round of redistricting, voters of color were actually short 5 congressional seats. And then when you look at when you look at our state legislator, only 36% of our elected officials are people of color, while that, statewide, we have, I think, 62% people of color. And so that huge discrepancy between the numbers is because of partisan and racial gerrymandering. That being said, I also want to point out that the state has been found to have intentionally discriminated or violated the Voting Rights Act, specifically in redistricting, for every single decade since the passage of the Voting Rights Act. So that's 50 years now. And so with all the mistakes that were made in 2011, moving forward into 2021, it's going to be a very difficult to navigate these waters. We don't have pre-clearance anymore. We have a whole bunch of different factors moving into this next round of redistricting. So it's going to be very difficult for us to see improvements in the redistricting process, improvements in representation, but we have to be committed to the fight for fair representation, because we have to. Our communities are on the line right now.
Absolutely. Ray, would you care to take from that and sort of give us your thoughts on when you mentioned power, and specifically how it's reflected in this process, and maybe what you think can be done to sort of correct the imbalance of power that Stephanie has pointed out?
No, and I think, Stephanie gave very good context, because, even I think there was an article from the Texas Tribune when it talked about much of the growth, I think, from the initial reports was from urban centers, specifically, I believe, in the Latin community and even the Asian community across the state of Texas. And so to her, one of her points, it's definitely going to impact communities of color, the packing and cracking, either separating us to make, our votes weaker in terms of representation, or putting us into majority minority districts where we only get, 2 or 3 seats. And where we have a voice, but those voices are not as loud as they would otherwise be if it was broken out more equitably. And I tried to say that as simply as possible. So hopefully that made sense. But I think that, to your initial point in the question, it matters when you have representation, because they're going to be more likely to advocate for the issues of your community. So of course, everybody wants to be represented, whether it's the Asian community, the Latin community, the Black community. We all want to make sure our voice is heard. And when they go through the process of gerrymandering and carving out the districts specifically to maintain power, And I think even in the current makeup of our, state legislature, majority white males, it does not adequately reflect the voice of many of the people in the state of Texas. And so in terms of what can we do, a lot of it is going to be legal recourse. Stephanie has been doing an amazing job of keeping myself and everybody abreast of a lot of the hearings that have already taken place. So making sure that your voice is heard at those hearings. I know there's one coming up this Saturday, I believe, for Central Texas. So if you know people in that area, make sure they do testify. You can also still provide public comment. But I think also reaching out to your respective representatives, irrespective of what side of the aisle on, to make sure that they are doing so when redrawing the lines in a fair way. And of course, we'll lean on those legal entities to handle the lawsuits and whatnot. But those things will definitely have to take place.
Debbie, can I ask you to weigh in? And then I do have a clarifying question for Stephanie from the audience.
So power to me is the ability to influence policies that are going to impact your life, right? That's basically in a nutshell what power is. The division of power or the sharing of power is where Texas has for decades had a problem, right? And it's the result of gerrymandering or fear of actually sharing power or fear of having all people represented and all the different issues that they care about, right? And it overlooks the idea that, in fact, regardless of what race or ethnicity you are, there are actually many issues that form communities of interest, that go across those ethnic lines, right? And it's those spaces where you have opportunity coalition districts, where then it's not about ethnic background or race. It actually for that district, it should actually be about who has the best ideas and the willingness to actually put in the time and the effort and the work to get things done that are going to benefit everybody who lives in that community, right? And that's something that I think the fear of sharing of this power and influence prevents that from happening a lot of times. And to what Stephanie said, in the 2011, redistricting, the Asian community was specifically targeted for the district of 137 and 149 was basically packed, right? And this is, I think 137 was formerly Scott Hochberg's district. First it was split, then it was packed or tried to be packed. But essentially the Asiatown area went from being an east and west to now having the east side split further in half. And so Asiatown is split into 3 pieces, right? But specifically the lawsuit referred to 137 and 149 being packed to deliberately prevent the Asian community from being able to have the opportunity of 2 representatives versus only 1, right? So that, for us, I remember that very specifically. And that is one of the motivations for why, our group worked as hard as we did last year to make sure everybody gets counted. And we want everyone to, go and testify, because even though we have a great opportunity for gerrymandering again this time around, we need everybody to go testify to say, this is how it ought to be, so that there is evidence and proof that there are people who actually care and live in the state who are not happy with how and are not satisfied with how things are being currently done to deliberately, essentially disenfranchise people.
It's very well put. Debbie, and I'd like to come back if we can to that idea of coalition opportunity districts, because I think they are a really fascinating development that have a lot of potential to go a long way in correcting some of these past injustices. But before we return to that, I would like to ask Stephanie, we have a question from Kathy Davis. She would like to know, you did say that the state of Texas has been found guilty of wrongdoing in previous redistricting cases. could you just very quickly clarify or elaborate or give a little bit of detail as to were these federal lawsuits that were filed? Was this determined by a Supreme Court case? Just something to.
There are a few Supreme Court cases this past decade, actually. Specifically, okay, two things. Yes, the state has been found guilty of intentionally discriminating against voters of color in every single decade for the past 50 years. And so this past decade, though, was especially contentious. The litigation just wrapped up in 2019. That went to the Supreme Court twice. And so it was a very long struggle over the past decade. And we have actually learned a lot from the mistakes that the state made in 2011. So groups like the League and Fair Maps Texas and Debbie's group and Ray's group have all been working together to get out in front of this. We had a very important Supreme Court case in 2013 that gutted the Voting Rights Act. And so what this means is that our maps aren't going to be reviewed by a federal authority during this next round of redistricting. And that's what prevented the maps in 2011 from taking effect, because what happened in 2011 was the state did a really, really, really terrible job of drawing the maps. They really heavily discriminated against voters of color. But because we're under preclearance, those maps never took effect. We don't have that luxury, I guess I should say, now going into 2021. The Supreme Court took that right away from us. And so we've been working to mobilize our communities across the state to get out ahead of the redistricting process this time around to help create a record for future litigation if it comes to that. That's the best way that we can prepare for this, because this redistricting litigation is very contentious. It's fraught for problems. There's lots of confusion, lots of parties that want to get involved. Yeah, so we've been working for the past year and a half, 2 years to mobilize our communities to participate.
Stephanie, I'd like to stay with you for just one more second. I probably should have thought of doing this a little bit sooner in our conversation, but if you could just very quickly, very briefly kind of sketch out what is the actual redistricting process? We have that question coming from one of the audience.
Sure. So after we take our census count, the census count basically counts every single person in the US, regardless of whether they're a citizen or immigrant. Every resident of the US has to be counted. We used to do this to know where to send resources and to allocate tax funds accordingly. But back in 1962, there was an important Supreme Court case, Reynolds versus Sims, that outlined the one person, one vote ruling. That meant that all of our election districts now have to be equal in size. So the census became much more important after the 1960s. And so after we determine the size of our states, we basically have to go back and redraw all of our districts to make sure they're equal in population size. And again, that's to uphold that one person, one vote ruling. The group that's in charge of drawing our election maps for our state house, state senate, state board of education, and our congressional maps is the Texas legislator. And so these maps are passed as regular legislation, and that gives you an important clue about how the process works. So if one party is in control of the legislator at the time the maps were drawn, that party is going to have an outweighted say in what the maps are going to look like. And so here in Texas, we've had both parties, both Democrats and Republicans, heavily gerrymander against one another. So in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, it was Democrats that heavily gerrymandered against Republicans. And then in the 2000s and recently, this past decade, it's been Republicans that have heavily gerrymandered against Democrats. So both parties have used it to their advantage, but the whole process of gerrymandering is to minimize your opposing party's vote, basically. And so they draw district maps, they go block by block, choose their voters, and they put as many of a certain group of people into districts to either minimize their voice or maximize their voice, or that's how they basically game the system.
And I'd like to turn back to Ray before coming back around to Debbie, but as you say, this has always been a sort of a partisan maneuver, whether it was Democrats or Republicans, but it has always seemed to come at the expense of communities of color. So sort of whether it was Democrats gerrymandering against Republicans or Republicans gerrymandering against Democrats, the people who always seemed to lose in that tug of war were, clearly communities of color. And so Debbie had brought up something interesting when she was speaking, coalition opportunity districts. And I was wondering if you could weigh in a little bit and shed some light on that past history and whether you think that there are opportunities for correction here locally or statewide. What would you like to see in the process to sort of help address some of this inequity?
Well, I think it's probably along the same lines of what Debbie's mentioning. We've had meetings, we're a part of a collective called Houston in Action. And part of what we talk or have discussed is community mapping and actually engaging our respective constituencies that we serve through our various nonprofits to get feedback from them on what they would like to see as it relates to these lines being drawn, which is a very detailed process, very community focused, and very labor intensive as well. But it's something that a lot of our nonprofits have taken the task of engaging the community. And in a perfect world, Zach, I feel like that would probably be the most beneficial. I was having a meeting today actually with our CEO, Mr. Judson Robinson, and he quoted, I can't remember who he quoted, but it was basically saying that democracy is messy. And, these conversations where we come together, it takes a lot of our time, which people don't always want to spend. But when we take the time to invest and engage the community, we walk away with more clarity, a lot of instances, better understanding, common ground, and the ability to be open-minded as we're going through these different processes. And so I think those coalitions, the community mapping, whatever different terms we come up with, those would be ideal. It's just that the powers that be don't seem to want to engage in those different types of methodology at the end of the day, because they're just focused on what's beneficial to them. And so it's not always, I think, focused on race, but it definitely is a part of it. And I think even Debbie touched on it in one of her earlier comments. It's more so a mindset. You have certain people who are just very close-minded in terms of their views, their perspectives, how they were reared, and they're not willing to, engage other groups. I'll give you an example. For me, myself, I try to do my best to be an ally when it comes to Black women. I'm not a Black woman. So how do I, educate myself on that? I have to reach out to them and get feedback on things that I'm saying and doing to make sure that, my behavior is not problematic and that I'm doing what I can to support that group. And so the same thing applies to our elected officials, those that are in positions of power. No, you don't have to be Black to represent Black people, but you do have to want to engage Black people in a meaningful way to represent Black people. And I think that's the most critical thing we need to get across.
Excellent. Debbie, I was hoping you could maybe talk a little bit about what these opportunity districts are, sort of how they work. And then after you've given us that, I think we have another question or two from the audience.
So an opportunity district is where you, basically, the easiest one is race, right? Where you're basically saying, let's create a district where it's not majority of any side or any ethnicity, right? In an ideal world, I'll just take A-Leaf, school district, for instance, right? Because A-Leaf is a very, very diverse area. And if you were to go to like Hastings or Elsig High School, and this is a few years ago, but I remember speaking with a teacher and she was pretty much like, this school is almost, 25%, of each community, whether you are Caucasian or Latinx or, African-American or Asian, right? So in an ideal world, you would have an opportunity district where the percentages of makeup of different communities are about the same, so that each community theoretically, right, or anyone, wanting to run for a position in that space, they're not going to be able to win just based off of their own, base of people, so to speak, right? Which then forces them to actually, and this is all in theory, but there are actually places that it works, it forces the candidates to actually focus on the actual ideas and policies of, how are we going to get things done? And how is it going to make lives better for the people who live in that district? Because now they're having to appeal to people to actually vote based on ideas and policy, right? Versus just, our ethnic base. And that's just an easy example to explain that. But again, that it works in a perfect world. It isn't necessarily going to work everywhere simply because, the demographic makeup of different areas, but there are going to be pocket areas that is a possibility, right? And so, part of the unity mapping that, Houston in Action has been, talking about is that's one of those, things where we should all be looking at, the bigger picture overall and seeing, okay, where does it make sense that, we can have districts that are aligned with different communities of interest based on whatever, area of interest it is, whether they're immigrants, for example, or, based on ethnicity, or just, it could even be religion, right? Like it's a very wide gamut. But the idea is that to actually have people come and talk about it and really have that kind of engagement that Ray is, talking about. Because when you have people who are actually trying to be engaged, right, then it does come down to, it doesn't matter, whether or not, is it an African-American representing an Asian or an Asian representing a Latino? Like, Al Green, for example, his district covers a wide range of, communities, right? And I, for one, would say, Congressman Green has been a champion on things that have happened, to the Asian American community and for all the different communities in his district, right? So, but it's because, Congressman Green has had this, very open-minded and welcoming, mindset and approach to different people, right? And so those type of, conversations, democracy is messy. It does take time. But when you actually take that time, I think it makes for a better society when people are actually trying to understand each other and wanting to make, the society that we all live in together just simply a better place, right? Who doesn't want to have, nice roads, safe homes that aren't falling apart, right? I mean, these are very basic fundamental things that if we were looking beyond and just looking at ideas and policies, that kind of engagement, that's what makes America the best place to be. We have that opportunity to have these type of conversations.
I agree completely. And as a very proud A-Leaf resident and a member of Congressman Green's 9th district, I always love it when we get held up as like a model for how to move stuff forward. Always great. All right, so we have a comment here in that Ray shared, that some states actually have commissions that are formed to deal with the issue of redistricting. As Stephanie pointed out, here in Texas, we handle it as part of the legislative process. So it goes through the committee process and hearings and so on and so forth. But I would like you each to weigh in, if you could, on, in your mind, what would sort of be an ideal process for this? If what we have is a little bit too fraught politically and in danger of constantly leaving different groups behind, what would a more perfect system for redistricting be? And no cheating. You can't go look at the LWV website for what it says there, because there's a pretty clear outline for what our organization would like to do. But I thought I would open it up and see what the three of you thought. So let me ask Stephanie, if you'd like to go first. Can you tell us a little bit about how you would like to see redistricting in the state reformed?
I can talk about the league's position. And it's my position too. That's why I do this work. But the league's position, both at the national level and the state level, is to support the creation of an independent redistricting commission like Ray was talking about. And so that's actually one of the reasons that the Fair Maps Texas Coalition was formed a few years ago, was to push for that reform at the state level, even though we knew it was a long shot. So let me give you an example of how this commission would function. So first of all, the power of redistricting is taken away from the legislator and it's given to an independent commission of citizens. Those citizens would be chosen by another independent body of auditors. And there is a very strict selection process to remove legislative influence. So you can't have been a legislator, worked in a legislator's office, worked as a lobbyist, worked as a consultant, donated to so much money to a certain campaign. You couldn't have, I'm at a loss now. There's actually 7 or 8 of these criteria on the list of conflicts of interest. To give you an example of how efficient this list is, though, in California, when they set up their commission back in 2011, they used this exact same model and list. They started with an applicant pool of 30,000 people. And by the time they applied that list of conflicts of interest, they narrowed it down to 2,000 people. Wow. And from there, it was more like a job application. So you had to have some sort of relevant background. And then they even at one point drew names from a lottery ball, and then they drew I think the first 8 from the lottery ball, and then they left the last 6 to be chosen so they could balance the diversity of the commission. So there was a lot of thought that went into the design of the commission that the league supports. But at any rate, once the commission is formed, they would then be tasked with holding public input hearings around the state. And what is important is the criteria that they use to draw the maps. And so what the league is a very big proponent of is not using partisan data when you draw maps. So we prefer to draw maps based on communities of interest. So we wouldn't be looking at who's a Democrat and who's a Republican. We would just be looking at like, oh, look, there's a community over here that wants to be kept together. Sorry, that's just how I have it in my mind. Like, oh, look, no, look, we have to go help them. Now we have to go do this. But that's how they did it in California. And it worked actually really well. Austin also used this method, and this is always the example that I like to give because specifically the commission was set up, first of all, to get single member districts for Austin, but also to get the communities of color on the east side of town that didn't have representation for the past 20 or 30 years, to give them a chance at having fair representation. And so the commission actually drew those districts on the east side of town first. They drew 4 opportunity districts, basically 2 majority minority and 2 opportunity districts. And those districts are still holding strong today. So that is one good success story for independent commissions. So we're hoping that other cities and counties across the state will adopt this idea and implement it as well.
Excellent. That's why I'm in the league. All right, Ray, would you care to share with us what you think might be another element of how we can do a better job, a more fair job of redistricting?
Yeah, I think the main thing I would add to that excellent description that Stephanie provided is the grassroots element of it. Mm-hmm. And I know she mentioned the public input hearings, but I think that one of the things we do very well within Houston in Action, under the direction of Frances and her team, is making sure that we're engaging the community at all levels. Even within the Urban League, we've been, we had to shift, I want to say, in the last 5 to 6 years, because for those that don't know, our primary location is downtown, but we saw the need to make sure that those people that didn't have, access to transportation, et cetera, and worked with the city and the county to set up these satellite offices that were actually in the community, to make sure that we were able to get close to the people that we're serving quicker, and kind of meeting them where they need. And so I think that element of it, just, we'd have to get much further ahead of it in terms of the education process, pulling together different groups, getting the feedback, putting it into a digestible format. And, I think all of us that worked on the census efforts, and we started early, it was still a lot. And so you would have to start like years in advance of 2030. So we're probably looking at, I don't know, like 2026, starting to get the ball rolling to do it effectively. But that would be the only thing I think that I would also add.
All right. Debbie, what would you like to see incorporated into this process to make it more more equitable?
I echo everything that Stephanie and Ray just said. I would just say two things, right? Two additional things is a word of caution when we talk about, expertise, right? Or who's qualified. Because that's sometimes used as a way of preventing people of different ethnic backgrounds from being able to participate, because we say, well, they aren't qualified, or we can't find enough qualified people, when in fact some things come down to simply common sense. And if people were disenfranchised before and not able to participate, then how would they have gained that experience, right? So we should be looking at, are there other, equitable experience, like, whether it's education or, serving on other boards, like that we should, if and when that happens, right, and hopefully it will happen in the future, that we are cautious and careful about making sure that we don't use that type of language as a way of excluding people, because it has been used that way before.
Okay. Excellent point.
And then, the other thing, I would just add on to what, Ray has said, is starting early, right? And for those groups who are able to, if you have the opportunity to, right, then think beyond just your own community. And, for example, we were very, fortunate with, in terms of, last minute funding. And because we had pretty much been saving for the census since 3+ years ago, because this was, the third time that we've been doing it. And so we had started saving up early, right? I would encourage every organization out there, come, 2026, start setting aside just a little bit of seed money, so that come, 2029, you have the money to actually go ahead and start doing some of the outreach materials. Because, even if the Census Bureau is, not under the control of idiots who cut the budget in half and then, create, things in language translated, but only as PDF files that you can't actually have any funding to print to actually use for outreach, then you can actually, start doing stuff on your own. And even when that funding is available for community outreach, it will still take time to go through all the red tape, which is, very critical for, smaller communities, especially to start outreach earlier, and especially for limited English proficiency communities, right? And immigrant communities. But in terms of opportunity, we went and lit dropped 221,000 doors. 160 or 170 some of those doors were apartment complexes, right? And so I would just encourage, the next time around, for partners to be able to, let's do it together, right? Because we did not go and just say, we're only going to target Asian doors. We target every door, because we just wanted everyone to be counted. And I would just encourage everyone the next time around to do that again.
Beautiful. Well, I believe we are starting to creep up on our time here, but I would like to give you all one more question. So we do have one from the gallery, and it says from Tanya Richardson, and it says, when you say we need to contact our legislator or representative, do you mean at all levels, state and federal, Senate and House, or just the state level? Is there one forum where our voice might be more likely to be heard? So to take that question and sort of repackage it just a little bit, if you could tell the members of this evening's salon conversation, the audience, what is the one thing that you think they can do or should do to make sure that their voice is heard on the issue of redistricting, what would it be?
Zach, can I make a suggestion? Sorry. Hi, everyone.
Sure.
I'm hopping in out of nowhere. Maybe we can have Ray and Debbie go, and then have Stephanie take the reins and share her calls to action.
Beautiful. Love it. All right.
Okay.
Ray, you're up, sir.
Yes, I would say just make sure you provide public comment. If you do live in one of those areas where you're still able to participate in the hearings, and I think there is some flexibility with them being virtual, But if not, at a minimum, provide that written comment. And I'm pretty sure we can send out the link, because to Stephanie's point, we know litigation is on the horizon and we need to have as much of that community input on record and documented, so that we have as strong a case as possible, so that once the attorneys do get involved, they can do what they need to do.
Beautiful. So written testimony, submitting written testimony, critical. All right, Debbie.
I echo what Ray says, right? We need everybody, not just the people who are in the leadership of these organizations, but we need as many, average citizen, whether they are youth or, seniors, like we need to go and just get everybody to submit written comment the same way we were trying to get everyone to count in the census.
All right, gang, you heard them. Written testimony to these committees. And now, without any further ado, I'm going to ask Stephanie Swanson to please share the league's call to action. Stephanie.
So the written testimony that we're talking about, though, I'll share the links in just a second, and we can send this out afterwards in a follow-up email. It's also on the league's website. But right now, both the House and Senate redistricting committees are taking public input, and the type of input that they want to hear from communities is literally about where your community is located, what ties your community together. So to think about it, think about a map and think about put a circle around the map where you work, where you go to school, where your kids go to school, where you shop. And that's basically the type of info they want to know. Also to include in this description of your community, take, for example, if your neighborhood was to have a community town hall event, what would that town hall event be about? So any common issues that you have that you're working on, that's the type of stuff that they want to know about, because that is what makes you a community of interest. And that is exactly why you need representation, so that representative can make sure all of your resources and needs are being met as a community. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen really quick, and I have more calls to action. Don't know why I have a whiteboard up. I'm sorry. Let me try this one more time. Let's go. I might have to share my screen twice, so sorry about that. Okay, so really quick. So this event was part of a broader national event by the league. This week is our People Powered Day of Action. It's supposed to be on the 29th, but we've been flexible, and there have been leagues all across the state and all across the nation that have been hosting events. Here in Texas, we have 9 local leagues that are hosting different events for the Day of Action. So tomorrow, the State League and the Fair Maps Texas Coalition, we're holding our own event, and this is for state legislative advocacy work that we're doing. So you've heard me talk about all the mistakes that the state made in 2011. There were a lot of them. They're already starting to make these same mistakes again as we move into the next round of redistricting. So we are going to break down the events of the legislative session tomorrow, and we're going to explain the importance of one bill that they refused to hold a committee hearing for. It's called the Redistricting Transparency Act. We're going to explain that legislation, and we're going to hopefully mobilize people to make calls and advocate with the legislator for a committee hearing for that bill. We're also going to be talking about prison gerrymandering on tomorrow's call as well, because that bill also needs a committee hearing. And just as one additional thing to say about prison gerrymandering is a practice of counting prisoners in the location that they're being housed in prison rather than in their last place of residence. And so this actually skews representation. And in Houston specifically, you guys lost out on a House district last time because of the prison gerrymandering effect. So TCRP, the Texas Civil Rights Project, is going to be talking about prison gerrymandering on tomorrow's call, and they will explain how you guys can take action as well. And then on Thursday, another event that I wanted to throw out there for you guys to consider. the State League partnered with a local group called the Houston Department of Transportation. We worked with this group to mobilize community members in Houston to provide testimony. Shirley Ronquillo works with this. She's one of the leaders in this group. She actually reached out to us for assistance because she just wanted to have interpreters for her community at the hearing. The Senate actually declined to do so. And so we had to threaten legal action, and the League provided an interpreter. Not only that, but we then recruited folks from the Asian American Pacific Islander community to provide in-language testimony at the hearings as well. Okay, regardless though, this Thursday, Shirley's group is providing, it's a celebration of their advocacy work around the redistricting hearings. Part of it is going to be in Spanish, but it's going to be in English, and we're going to have an interpreter as well. So that event is going to be taking place on Facebook, and it'll be broadcast to the League's Facebook page. Ooh. There we go. So another thing I wanted to mention was the National League is going to be having a pep rally for the day of action. You can tune in to both their Facebook page and the website to watch it. And then, as I mentioned, on the 29th, so the 28th, tomorrow, the State League will be having our own virtual event that I spoke about on the last slide. And then on the 29th, we're hoping that you take all of that information you learned on the 28th and turn around and go and talk to legislators. We also have some important calls to action to share on the state's webpage. Before I do that, and before I show you the webpage, these are the links for the folks to submit public comments to the Senate and House redistricting committees. And if possible, I'll try to circulate that afterwards to everyone. Hopefully we can get that out to everyone. Let me take you to the League's website really quick, where I can show you how to take action. Now it's only showing me the whiteboard. Okay, so it's not going to work, but if you go to the League of Women Voters of Texas main webpage, on the left-hand side, you'll see a bunch of tabs basically, or buttons to click on. You want to go to the Take Action tab, and there's two important calls to action right now for redistricting app. One of them supports the creation of independent commissions. Another one asks for just the creation of a fair and open redistricting process. There's also a lot of other important calls to action up there that we would really love everyone's support on. There's a lot of bad election bills out right now. They're also trying to create their own court of appeals and direct all civil cases involving these bad bills that they're going to be passing to go to this court. So we definitely need folks alert and to lend your voice to this process. This is really simple, super simple to use. You just find the one that you want to send, you click on it, and there is already a pre-filled letter basically that if you agree with it, you can fill out your name and address and send it in, and you send a message to your elected official. And so that's it for the calls to action on my end. And I'll try, like I said, I'll try to get all these links out to you afterwards so you have them for your use.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. We really appreciate the call to action and the details on how we can actually make the call. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we are probably coming up on time, so I'm going to turn it back over to my very good friend, Courtney, to take us out.
Hi, everyone, again. Thank you to Ray and Stephanie and Debbie. I'm going to echo an audience member, Kathy, who just wrote that she learned so much and so impressed and grateful. And I echo that very deeply. Every time we have these discussions, I feel like I do learn so much, and I hope that our members are feeling that way too. So thank you for spending your evening with us. I know it's a very busy time for you during session, and we are very grateful. I will close out by just sharing again some of the opportunities that we have for you to get involved. First and foremost, if you are not already a member of the League, because in this for this event, we did decide to open it up because we felt like redistricting was such a critical topic and so timely that we wanted to reach as far as we could. So if you are not already a member of League of Women Voters Houston, please go to lwvhouston.org/membership, and we will very gladly welcome you. And I would say if you think you are a member, but you're not quite sure, feel free to email us, because we know that some folks are members of LWV-Texas or US, but maybe not Houston. And the best part is when you do become a member of LWV-Houston, you also become a member automatically of Texas and US. Finally, one announcement I did not share at the beginning, but our wonderful board member Liza Alonso reminded me that we are also currently accepting nominations for the next board and chairs. So we have a lot of committees where you could get involved as a leader in that committee without being a board member as well. So to be considered, please send your resume to lizaalonso@gmail.com as soon as possible, and I'll put that in the chat as well. We thank you for your time today and for your support of the League and important issues like redistricting. If we can do anything for you, please don't ever hesitate to reach out at lwv@lwvhouston.org. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Ray, Debbie, Stephanie, it was a pleasure. Everybody in the audience, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank
Debbie,
you for
thank
joining
you so
us.
much.